Hey, here's volume 1 of our Mafia compilations you can find on the channel. I'll cover 6 stories here, and you can catch a brand new one next week. Subscribe if you're new for daily uploads, and feel free to suggest stories for us to cover next time.
Number 1. The Irish mob mocked the Italians until the 5 families took over New York. July 4th, 1857. Lower Manhattan, 5 Points neighborhood. A riot erupted that would change the course of organized crime in America. The Dead Rabbits gang, Irish immigrants fighting for survival, battled the Bowery Boys in the streets for hours. They fought so hard that both local police and militia units couldn't stop them. This was Irish power. For over 100 years, Irish gangs had completely controlled New York's underworld. They owned the docks, they owned the streets, they owned the political machine that ran the city. They were untouchable. Then the Italians started arriving, and within just 30 years, everything changed. The dominance, when Irish gangs ruled everything. From the 1830s through the late 1800s, Irish street gangs completely controlled New York City. The Dead Rabbits, the Wyos, the Bowery Boys, the Gopher Gang. These weren't small operations. These were massive criminal organizations with thousands of members. The Dead Rabbits alone had enough soldiers to riot against the police and win. They fought 200 battles against the Bowery Boys in just 10 years. So many fights that the city couldn't control them. These gangs controlled the docks where ships came in. They controlled gambling operations. They controlled prostitution. They controlled protection rackets that every business had to pay. They also had something much more powerful than soldiers. They had political power. Irish gangs, like the Dead Rabbits, were connected to Tammany Hall, the political machine that literally ran New York City. Politicians owed the gangs favors. In return, the gangs got police protection and immunity. So if you were Irish and connected to the mob, the police basically couldn't touch you. The Irish gangs ran the waterfront. They ran Hell's Kitchen. They ran large parts of Manhattan, and they made enormous money doing it. By the late 1800s, the Irish mob thought they were permanent fixtures of power. Nobody could challenge them. Certainly not some poor Italians who were just arriving in the city. The arrival. The Italians nobody took seriously. In the 1880s and 1890s, Italian immigrants started arriving in New York City in large numbers. They were poor. They were new. They didn't speak English. They didn't have political connections like the Irish did. The Irish mob literally mocked them. What could these Italians possibly do? They had no power, they had no territory, they had no political protection. The Irish controlled the police, the politicians, and the streets. Then the Italians started organizing. Italian criminal organizations like the Morello family started operating in Lower Manhattan. They began encroaching on the Irish-controlled waterfront. They started muscling their way into neighborhoods the Irish had owned for decades. The Irish decided to do something about it. The fight, the White Hand Gang. In the early 1900s, various Irish gangs united together to form the White Hand Gang. This was supposed to be the final answer, a unified Irish organization designed to crush the Italian threat and protect Irish territory. They fought the Italians, they protected the docks, they enforced Irish control. For a while, it worked. The White Hand Gang was strong enough to push back against Italian encroachment. But something was happening that the Irish didn't see coming.
The problem. The Italians were organized differently. The Irish gangs were powerful, but they had a fatal weakness. They were independent. They were divided. Different Irish gang leaders fought each other as much as they fought the Italians. The White Hand Gang had leadership problems, internal conflicts, betrayals. The murders of key leaders like Denny Meehan and Bill Lovett left the White Hand Gang weakened and fragmented. More importantly, the White Hand Gang was stuck in old thinking. They fought like street gangs, brawls, territorial disputes, simple street violence. The Italians were building something different, something organizational, something systematic. Italian mobsters like Lucky Luciano were studying how business worked. They weren't just running street rackets. They were building a structure, a hierarchy, rules, organization. Luciano looked at how the Irish had organized politically and thought bigger. What if we organize crime the same way? What if we have bosses, captains, soldiers, and rules that everyone follows? The turning point, 1931. By 1931, the Italian organized crime families had completely taken over New York. Salvatore Maranzano, an Italian crime boss, reorganized all the Italian criminal operations into 5 families. The Luciano family, now the Genovese family, the Profaci family, now the Colombo family, the Gagliano family, now the Lucchesi family, the Mangano family, now the Gambino family, and the Bonanno family. These 5 families weren't just criminal operations. They were businesses. They have rules. They had structure. They were organized like corporations with a board of directors. Lucky Luciano established something called the Commission, a ruling body made up of bosses from all 5 families. When conflicts came up, the Commission decided. When territories needed to be divided, the Commission decided. It was genius. The Irish had never organized this way. They had powerful gangs, but not a system, not a structure. By 1931, the Italian organized crime families had completely taken over New York. They had taken the gambling operations. They had taken the narcotics trade. They had taken everything the Irish controlled. The decline. What happened to the Irish? The White Hand Gang disappeared by 1925. By 1931, Irish organized crime in New York was essentially dead at the top levels. Some Irish gangs survived, the Gopher Gang, small independent operators, but none of them had the power or organization of the 5 families. The Irish gangs had been replaced by something more efficient, more organized, more profitable. The irony is that the Irish had actually won their fight against the Italians. The White Hand Gang had successfully defended Hell's Kitchen and the New York docks in the 1920s. But they lost the war anyway, because the Italians didn't play by Irish rules. They didn't fight street battles. They organized politically and economically. While the Irish was celebrating their street victories, the Italian 5 families were becoming the most powerful criminal organization in America. The later years, one last Irish victory. In the 1970s and 1980s, an Irish gang called the Westies tried to make a comeback. They were based in Hell's Kitchen. They were known for extreme violence. Rudy Giuliani called them the most savage organization in the long history of New York. For a while, they were powerful enough that the Italian Mafia had to respect them. The Westies leader Jimmy Coonan even made an alliance with Roy DeMeo of the Gambino family. But it didn't last. The Westies were ultimately prosecuted under RICO laws. Jimmy Coonan went to prison in 1986. By the late 1980s, the Irish mob was finished in New York. Once again, they lost to the Italian families. Why the Italians won? The Irish had numbers, they had political power, they had territory. But the Italians had organization. The Italians understood that the future of organized crime wasn't about being the toughest street fighter. It was about being the most systematically organized. The 5 families created a structure that could last generations. They created rules that kept the organization stable. They created hierarchy so disputes could be resolved without constant war. The Irish gangs were more like medieval warlords, powerful locally, but not organized enough to compete against the system. When the Italians built that system in 1931, it was over for Irish organized crime in New York. The five families would dominate for the next 40 years. They would make more money than the Irish gangs ever made. They would have more political power. They would control more territory. And they did it by being better organized, not by being tougher or more violent.
The lesson: organization beats toughness. The story of the Irish mob and the five families teaches something important about power. You can be tough, you can be violent, you can even win street battles. But if your opponent is more organized, you lose the war. The Irish mob could fight. The Irish mob could intimidate. The Irish mob could control their neighborhoods through fear. But they couldn't compete against an organization that had clear leadership structure, rules everyone followed, territory divided fairly, disputes resolved systematically, and business operations run like corporations. The five families understood something the Irish didn't. In the modern world, organization matters more than individual strength. That's why the Italian mob lasted for decades while the Irish mob faded away. And that same lesson applies today to any organization that wants to last.
Number 2.
July 4, 1902. Grodno, Belarus, Russian Empire. A baby boy was born into a family of Polish Jews in one of the most anti-Semitic regions in the world. 9 years later, that boy arrived in New York with nothing but his parents and the clothes on his back. By the time he was 30, he had created something the IRS would chase for the rest of his life, but never fully understand. His name was Meyer Lansky, and he invented modern money laundering. The nobody, a third-grade education. Meyer Lansky's family was poor, so poor that they could barely afford to keep him in school. He dropped out after third grade. 9 years old. That was the extent of his formal education. The IRS didn't have a chance against a man with a third-grade education because what Lansky had wasn't learned in school. He had something more dangerous, a mathematical mind that couldn't be taught. Lansky could calculate odds and probabilities in his head faster than accountants could with pencils and paper. He could move numbers through systems and accounts in ways that made auditors dizzy. By his 20s, while other kids were finishing high school, Lansky was already being called the numbers man of organized crime. He didn't have a GED. He didn't have a degree. He had something better. He had a gift for seeing how money moved through the world and how to hide it. The partnership, Finding Lucky Luciano. In the early 1920s, Lansky partnered with a young criminal named Salvatore Luciano, the kid who would later be known as Lucky Luciano. The two men couldn't have been more different on the surface. Luciano was flashy, violent, the type of guy who handled problems with muscle and intimidation. Lansky was quiet, soft-spoken, the type of guy who handled problems with numbers and systems. But they understood something together that nobody else got. Crime could be organized, like a business. Up until that point, organized crime in America was messy. Local gangs, territorial disputes, no standardization, no system. Luciano and Lansky looked at that chaos and saw an opportunity to build something corporate. By the 1930s, they had created something called the National Crime Syndicate. It had structure, it had rules, it had territories divided fairly, it had a commission to settle disputes. In other words, it had organization. And organizing all of that crime required someone who understood money. That was Lansky. The innovation, inventing modern money laundering. Here's what made Lansky different from every criminal before him. He understood that if you wanted to run a criminal empire long-term, you couldn't just stuff money under your mattress. Eventually, someone would ask where the money came from. And if you couldn't answer that question, they'd arrest you for tax evasion or money laundering or conspiracy. So Lansky invented a system to move money through the world in ways that made it invisible. It started in 1932. He took cash from bootlegging operations, illegal alcohol during Prohibition, and moved it to Swiss bank accounts. The Swiss government had just passed a law in 1934 that allowed total banking secrecy. Banks didn't have to tell anyone anything about their accounts. Complete anonymity. Lansky used that. He created shell corporations, fake companies that existed only on paper. The mob would move money into these fake companies. The fake companies would send money to other fake companies. Those would send money to offshore banks. Those banks would lend money back to legitimate-looking operations. After enough layers, nobody could follow the money trail. The government would try to audit it, but they get lost in the maze of corporations and accounts. And the front companies would claim they were paying interest to these offshore banks, so they'd get tax deductions. The government ended up subsidizing Lansky's operations through tax write-offs. It was genius.
The expansion. Casinos around the world. By the late 1930s, Lansky had started expanding his gambling operations. Not just in New York, everywhere. Florida, New Orleans, Las Vegas, Cuba, the Bahamas, even London. Each casino made money through normal gambling, but that money then fed into Lansky's money laundering machine. Gamblers would come in with legitimate money, they'd lose at the tables, the house would keep the cash. But from the government's perspective, it looked like normal casino revenue. Except it wasn't. Casinos in Cuba were paying off dictators. Casinos in the Bahamas were being built with mob money disguised as legitimate investment. Lansky controlled or had interests in some of the most famous casinos in the world. In Cuba, he partnered with Bugsy Siegel on the Flamingo. He owned the Habana Riviera. He owned the Hotel Nacional. By 1950, Lansky's gambling empire stretched across the globe, and nobody could prove where the money was coming from. The problem: the IRS pays attention. In 1970, the IRS estimated Lansky's wealth at $300 million. That was equivalent to about $2.3 billion in today's money. All of it hidden, all of it untraceable, all of it existing in a financial maze that was virtually impenetrable. The IRS wanted to arrest him for tax evasion. They had investigated him for decades. They had agents watching him, they had auditors trying to follow his money, but they couldn't prove anything. Lansky's system was too sophisticated. Every dollar was accounted for on paper, but the accounting trail went through so many companies and accounts that by the time the IRS tried to follow it, they were lost. The government couldn't prove he owed taxes on money they couldn't prove he had made illegally. The escape. The 1970 gamble. By 1970, Lansky realized something. The IRS was getting closer. They had more investigators, they had better tools. He made a decision. He fled to Israel. Israel had a law called the Law of Return that allowed anyone of Jewish descent to immediately become an Israeli citizen. Lansky thought that once he was in Israel, the U.S. government couldn't touch him. He'd be protected by Israeli law. He was wrong. Israel didn't want to harbor a wanted criminal. Political pressure from the U.S. government led to Lansky being expelled from Israel in 1972. So, he came back to America and faced the charges. The trial, when the system failed. Lansky was indicted for income tax evasion. The government had its case, they had numbers, they had evidence of a sophisticated money laundering scheme, but they had one problem. They couldn't prove where the actual money came from originally.
In a tax evasion case, you have to prove someone earned money and didn't pay taxes on it. The government could prove Lansky had money, they could prove he moved it around, but they couldn't prove he earned it illegally, because Lansky's system was so sophisticated that it looked legitimate. In 1973, after weeks of trial, the jury didn't convict him of tax evasion. They convicted him on one count: contempt of court for refusing to testify about his finances. Even that conviction was overturned on appeal. Lansky walked out of the courtroom a free man. The IRS had failed. The mystery: where did it go? The government insisted that Lansky had hidden away $300 million. But when they searched for it after his arrest, they couldn't find it. Not in Swiss banks, not in offshore accounts, not in shell corporations. Nothing. When Lansky died in 1983, his official bank account had less than $35,000 in it. So where did the $300 million go? There are several theories. One is that Lansky's money was shared with other mob bosses and he lost track of it over time because he used so many intermediaries. Another theory is that the money was never really $300 million to begin with. The IRS estimated it, but the actual amount was lower. A third theory is that Lansky really did hide it somewhere so well that even the government still doesn't know where it is. And a fourth theory is that Lansky gave the money to the Israeli government in exchange for protection when he fled there. We'll probably never know. What we do know is this: the FBI estimated he left behind over $300 million, but they never found a penny of it.
The legacy, the blueprint for everything. Meyer Lansky didn't invent crime. He didn't invent gambling. He didn't invent organized crime. But he invented the financial system that made all of it work at scale. Every money laundering technique used by modern criminals comes from something Lansky pioneered: shell corporations, offshore banks, layered accounts. Fake companies lend into other fake companies. It's all Lansky. Today's banking regulations designed to stop money laundering, they exist because of Lansky. The concept of KYC, know your customer, that banks have to follow, that came from trying to stop what Lansky did. When you see news about the IRS cracking down on suspicious financial transfers, they're using tools designed specifically to catch Lansky-style operations. Lansky's system became so sophisticated that governments around the world had to reorganize their entire approach to financial crime. One man with a third-grade education changed how the entire world handles money. The untouchable. Why he succeeded. The reason Meyer Lansky succeeded where so many other criminals failed is simple. He understood that in the modern world, the thing that destroys criminals isn't violence or law enforcement. It's a paper trail. Every mobster before Lansky got caught because they made money and they had to account for it somewhere. Lansky solved that problem. He created a system where money could exist without leaving a trail. The IRS could see that money was moving, but they couldn't see where it came from or where it was going. Luciano had muscle, but Luciano got convicted of running a prostitution ring and spent time in prison. Siegel had audacity, but Siegel got murdered because he spent too much money on the Flamingo. Lansky had invisibility. For nearly 50 years, he was deeply involved in organized crime, and the most serious conviction he ever received was illegal gambling, 1953. 2 months in jail. That's it. That's the entire criminal record of one of the most powerful crime figures in American history. The question, was it real? Here's something important to understand. Meyer Lansky denied almost everything. He denied he was involved in narcotics, denied he was involved in gambling operations, denied he had hidden money.
His biographer Robert Lacey later wrote that there was no real evidence to sustain the notion of Lansky as king of all evil. The truth is complicated. Some people think the IRS and FBI exaggerated Lansky's role in organized crime, that they made him into a bigger figure than he really was. Others believe Lansky was even more powerful than people realized, that he had connections to Israeli intelligence, that he influenced global politics, that his reach was truly worldwide. The honest answer is we don't know for sure. But what we do know is that Lansky created financial systems that worked, that he moved money successfully, that he built casinos and gambling operations that made millions. Whether he was the mob's accountant or the actual boss of all bosses probably depends on who you ask. But what's undeniable is this. Meyer Lansky proved something that still matters today. With the right system, with the right financial structures, with enough layers between you and the money, you can hide almost anything. And if you're smart enough, you can do it while everyone's watching. The irony, the man who broke him. The biggest irony of Meyer Lansky's life is that he was eventually caught because of something he didn't even do. He wasn't convicted for the money laundering. He wasn't convicted for running casinos. He wasn't convicted for being involved in organized crime. He was convicted for contempt of court for refusing to answer questions. And even that was overturned. The IRS never cracked his system. They never found the money. They never proved tax evasion. The financial system Lansky created was so sophisticated that it outlasted him. Today, governments around the world are still trying to close loopholes that Lansky opened. Offshore banking regulations, shell corporation restrictions, financial transparency laws, all of these exist because Meyer Lansky showed the world what was possible. A kid with a third-grade education proved that you didn't need a law degree or an MBA to understand how money really works. You just needed to understand one thing. Money wants to hide, and if you build the right system, you can help it hide forever.
Number 3, December 26, 1946, the Nevada desert. A man in a black tuxedo and a pink carnation stepped out of a limousine. Behind him stood the most ambitious casino anyone had ever seen. Massive, luxurious, impossible. His name was Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, and he had just broken the biggest rule in the mob. He did it without permission. The setup, the desert nobody wanted. In 1945, Las Vegas was nothing. A few small casinos, dirt roads, desert heat. That was it. Anyone who suggested building something big there would get left out of the room. Except Bugsy Siegel. Siegel was one of the most dangerous men in America. A hitman for Lucky Luciano's mob, a guy who had murdered his way to the top of organized crime. But in the mid-1940s, something changed in him. He looked at the desert and saw something nobody else saw. He saw money. Not just money, billions of dollars waiting to be made. He saw gamblers from California coming to the desert. He saw rich people. He saw a future where Las Vegas would be the gambling capital of the world. He called it his dream, his vision, his future. But there was one problem. Luciano and the other mob bosses back east didn't believe in the dream. In fact, they thought it was crazy. The problem, nobody believed him. He pitched his idea to the commission, the ruling board of organized crime. They heard him out, and then they said no. Vegas was too far away, too risky. The investment was too big. There wasn't enough money in the desert. More importantly, they didn't trust Siegel with their money. Siegel had a reputation for being reckless, violent, unpredictable. He got angry easily. He killed people on a whim. He couldn't be controlled. Why would they give him millions of dollars to build a casino in the middle of nowhere? Lucky Luciano specifically warned Siegel to forget about Vegas. But Siegel didn't listen. He decided to build it anyway. The move, taking matters into his own hands. Siegel found the hotel that was already being built, the Flamingo. It belonged to a businessman named Billy Wilkerson. Wilkerson had run out of money. He couldn't finish the project. Siegel saw his opportunity. He approached Wilkerson. He made a deal. He would take over the hotel, complete construction, make it magnificent. Then Siegel went to his mob partners and asked for money. Most of them said no. But Meyer Lansky, Siegel's oldest friend from Brooklyn, believed in the dream too. Lansky convinced some of the other bosses to invest. They put in money reluctantly, not because they believed in Vegas, but because Lansky asked them to. More importantly, they put in money because Luciano was losing power and other bosses were starting to branch out on their own. By 1946, Siegel had the funding, $5 million. He started construction. The construction. Money disappearing fast. Here's where things got dark. The Flamingo was originally budgeted at $1.2 million. Siegel spent $6 million, 5 times more than planned. Where did all that money go? Some of it went to building an actual luxury hotel, a casino that had never been seen before. Crystal chandeliers, expensive furniture, the best staff, professional dealers flown in from all over the country. It had a golf course, tennis courts, a trap shooting range, imported palm trees from all over the world. It was supposed to be a palace, a dream made real. But a lot of the money also disappeared. Siegel's girlfriend was a woman named Virginia Hill. Reporters called her the Queen of the Mob. Hill was stealing money from the construction budget, lots of it. She was depositing in banks in Europe, building herself a secret fortune. Siegel was stealing too, skimming money off the cop, writing bad checks, doing whatever he needed to do to keep the project going. When the mob bosses back east heard about the cost overruns, they were furious. Luciano called Siegel back to a secret meeting. The meeting, Luciano's warning. The mob held a secret meeting in Havana, Cuba. All the major bosses showed up. They discussed the Flamingo. Luciano told Siegel directly. The money was gone. The project was over. Give back what was left. Siegel argued. He said the hotel would make them billions. Give him time. Let him finish it. Luciano said no. He demanded the money back immediately. Siegel refused. He didn't have the money. It was all spent, and the hotel was almost done. The two men argued. Siegel's famous temper came out. He got angry. He refused to back down. Finally, Luciano said something that would become legendary in mob history. When one of Luciano's associates asked what should happen to Bugsy, Luciano reportedly replied, "Him, I can't help." That was mob code. That was a death sentence. The opening, June 1946. Despite everything, Siegel finished the Flamingo. December 26, 1946, opening night. Siegel wore his black tuxedo with the pink carnation. He was confident. He was in control. This was his moment. He had invited Hollywood celebrities, movie stars, important people. But a rainstorm canceled most of the flights from Los Angeles. The A-list celebrities didn't show up. The opening was a disaster. Only a few hundred people came. Celebrities like George Raft showed up, some performers, but not the crowds he expected. At the gambling tables, things got worse.
The few people who did show up got incredibly lucky. They won over $300,000 in the first 2 weeks. The Flamingo was losing money fast. The restaurant was losing money. The hotel rooms were losing money. Everything was bleeding cash. Local Las Vegas residents didn't like the Flamingo. They preferred the downtown casinos that were more casual. The Flamingo was too fancy, too formal, too exclusive. By January 1947, Siegel had to close the hotel temporarily to finish construction on the guest rooms. The mob was losing patience. They were already furious about the cost overruns. Now the casino they had funded was failing. Some of the mob's money people demanded Siegel give them their investment back. He couldn't. He didn't have it. And the hotel was almost done. The turning point. March 1947. Siegel reopened the hotel on March 1st, 1947. This time, things were different. The hotel rooms were complete, the staff was trained, the operation was professional. And slowly, gradually, things got better. By May, the Flamingo was making money, a profit of $300,000. Celebrities started coming, Gary Cooper, Susan Haywood, other big names. The operation was finally working. The dream was finally coming true. But it was too late for Bugsy Siegel. The execution, June 20th, 1947. On the evening of June 20th, 1947, Siegel was in his girlfriend Virginia Hill's home in Beverly Hills. He was sitting on the living room couch. A man approached the house with a rifle. He fired 9 shots through the window. Bullets hit Siegel 4 times, once in the face, once in the chest. Siegel died instantly. At almost the exact same moment, Meyer Lansky's men walked into the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. They announced a change in management. The mob was taken over. Siegel was dead. By the next day, Lansky and his partners had restructured the ownership. They fired Siegel's people. They put in their own managers. The Flamingo was now a mob operation. Within weeks, under new management, the Flamingo started making real money. The irony. Bugsy was right. Here's the crazy part. Bugsy Siegel was right. His dream came true. He was just dead before he got to see it. The Flamingo became one of the most profitable casinos in Las Vegas. Year after year, it made millions for the mob. Las Vegas grew into exactly what Siegel predicted: a gambling mecca, a destination for tourists, a money machine. Today, the Flamingo still stands. It's still one of the most famous casinos in Vegas. The mob never forgot what the Flamingo made for them. Hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions over the decades. All because one man believed in a dream that everyone else thought was crazy. The message, the price of being right. Luciano dismissed Bugsy's Vegas dream because it was too risky, too ambitious, too much money for a desert with nothing. Luciano was wrong. But being right didn't matter. Bugsy was dead. He didn't get to enjoy what he built. The mob took over the Flamingo. They made the money. They became richer because of Bugsy's vision. And Bugsy got a bullet through the window. This is the mob's core lesson. Loyalty matters less than profit. Vision matters less than survival. Being right doesn't protect you. The men who benefited from Bugsy's dream didn't mention his name for decades. They wanted people to forget about him. It took a 1991 movie called Bugsy for the story to become famous again. The legacy, a changed world. But his was true. Without Bugsy Siegel's dream, Las Vegas would be different today. Maybe there still would have been casinos. Maybe the mob would have eventually gone to Vegas anyway. But Siegel showed him it was possible. He showed him the money was there. He was willing to die for his vision. And even though the mob killed him before he could enjoy the success, his vision changed the entire American entertainment industry. Las Vegas became what it is because one man believed in it when nobody else did. And that's worth something, even if it cost him everything.
Number 4. October 1st, 1963. A packed Senate hearing room in Washington, D.C. The FBI's director had spent decades denying it even existed. Law enforcement called it rumors and urban legend. Politicians said it was a myth Italian Americans told themselves. Then, a prison inmate from New York sat down at a table in front of the entire U.S. Senate and changed everything. His name was Joe Valachi, and he was about to blow open the biggest secret in American crime. The setup. Nobody believed them. For years, the FBI insisted there was no organized crime network, no secret society running America's underworld, no mafia. The Bureau's most powerful man, FBI Director Edgar Hoover, flat out denied it existed. If Hoover said it wasn't real, then officially it wasn't real. But something was wrong with that story. Cops on the street knew it. They saw the same faces run in different neighborhoods. They heard the same names repeated in crime after crime. Someone was organizing all it is from the top. Yet the FBI said it was impossible. That's where Joe Valachi changed the game. In September 1963, senators started holding public hearings about organized crime. They wanted answers about who was really running the mob. They invited Valachi to talk. The problem? Nobody was ready for what he was about to say. The moment, September 27, 1963. Valachi walked into the Senate hearing room guarded by 200 U.S. Marshals. 200 Marshals? That's how seriously the government took protecting this one man. Not because he was famous, because what he knew could destroy an entire criminal empire. Cameras rolled, news reporters packed the room, millions of Americans watched on television. This was history happening live. A crime boss was about to testify on national TV. Someone who had been inside the system his entire life. Someone who knew the names, the rules, and the structure of everything. Senators started asking him questions, and Valachi started talking. He described something that had a name nobody outside the mob knew about. Cosa Nostra. He translated it, our thing. That's what the mob called themselves, Cosa Nostra. Not the Mafia, not a loose network of gangsters, an actual organized system with rules, leaders, and a structure. He didn't just mention it, he explained it in detail. The breakdown, what he revealed. Valachi described the entire organization like he was reading from a playbook. There were soldiers, regular members who did the work. Above the soldiers were captains. They ran the crews and reported to someone bigger. Above the captains were bosses. 5 of them controlled New York City alone. And above all the bosses was something called the Commission, a ruling body that made decisions for the entire Cosa Nostra, a board of directors for organized crime. Valachi named the bosses, he named the families, he described how you got made into the organization, the swearing-in ceremony where you had to burn a ball of paper while taking an oath. He explained how they protected members who got arrested, how they dealt with people who broke the rules, how the money moved through the system. This wasn't vague storytelling. This was the inside blueprint of American organized crime, delivered in a packed Senate chamber on live television. The FBI sat there listening, and they finally had to admit something. Hoover had been wrong the whole time. There was an organized crime network. It was real, and it had been operating in plain sight while federal agents said it didn't exist. Why this mattered. Before Valachi testified, law enforcement couldn't officially fight organized crime as an organized group. They chased individual crimes, individual robberies, individual murders. But if it was all one organization, then they could fight it differently. Within a few years, Congress passed new laws. The RICO statute, electronic surveillance rules, new tools designed specifically to fight organized crime as a system. By the 1980s, using what they learned from Valachi and those new laws, the FBI put almost every major mafia boss in prison. But it all started because one man decided to talk. The cost. Why did he do it? You need to know why Valachi even testified in the first place. In 1962, Valachi was in prison for drug dealing. His boss, a man named Vito Genovese, was in the same prison. Genovese sent word that Valachi was marked for death. He'd been accused of being an informant, which was a death sentence in the mafia world. Terrified, Valachi killed another inmate. He thought the man was an assassin sent to murder him. He was wrong. It was the wrong guy. He got a life sentence. Now facing death from his own people and a life sentence, Valachi made a choice: cooperate with the FBI or die in prison. He chose to talk. And not just casual talk, detailed, specific information. Names, dates, structure, everything. The mob called it betrayal. Valachi called it survival. The plot twist. Nobody expected this. Here's what's wild about Valachi's testimony. It didn't actually put many mob bosses in prison immediately. The information he gave was valuable for understanding how organized crime worked, but it didn't lead directly to major convictions of top leaders at the time. So you might think his testimony was a failure, but it wasn't. What it did was change how America thought about crime. The public now knew the mafia wasn't just a story. It was a real organization with a real structure. More importantly, it changed how the government could fight it. The laws that came after Valachi's testimony in the 1960s and 70s gave the FBI the ability to prosecute entire organized crime organizations, not just individual crimes. That's why by the 1980s, the same FBI that had denied the mafia existed was taking down nearly every major mafia boss in the country. The aftermath. What happened to Valachi? Valachi lived the rest of his life in prison under federal protection. The $100,000 bounty Genovese placed on his head never got collected. Genovese died in prison in 1969, still angry at Valachi for talking. Valachi tried to end it all in 1966. He tried to hang himself in his cell with an electrical cord. It failed. He stayed in prison until 1971, when he died from a heart attack in a federal prison in Texas. By then, his testimony had already changed the course of American law enforcement forever. The legacy. Why this video matters. When you watch organized crime documentaries today, they credit Valachi for everything. The way they talk about the mafia structure, the names of the families, the hierarchy, all of that comes from Valachi's testimony. But before 1963, none of that was public knowledge. The FBI didn't even admit it existed. One man broke the code of silence. One man decided that survival mattered more than loyalty. And one man's decision rippled through the entire American justice system. Everything changed because someone finally told the truth.
Number 5. September 1976, Brooklyn, New York. A young man walked into a bar in Little Italy. Nobody knew he was FBI. He had a fake driver's license, fake credit cards, a fake backstory, a fake life. His name was Donnie Brasco. And for the next 6 years, he would live inside the most dangerous criminal organization in America. What the mob didn't know was that every conversation, every meeting, every handshake was being recorded. The setup, a dangerous idea. In 1974, the FBI was chasing truck hijackers across New York. These weren't random criminals. They were connected to organized crime, the Bonanno family specifically.
The FBI assigned a young agent named Joseph Pistone to go undercover. Just for 6 months, they said. Just to figure out where the stolen trucks were going. It seemed simple enough. Except Pistone had a secret advantage. He was half Italian, spoke fluent Sicilian, and grew up in a neighborhood right next to where the mob operated. He knew how they talked, how they thought, how they moved. The FBI gave him a new identity, Donnie Brasco, a jewel thief from Miami. They trained him for weeks, lock-picking, safe-cracking, precious gems, everything a jewel thief would know. They gave him fake money, fake credit cards, a fake history. Then, they sent him into the most dangerous operation the FBI had ever attempted. The entry, making connections. Pistone didn't walk into a mob hangout. That would have been suicide. He had to work his way in, slowly, carefully, from the outside looking in. He started with small crooks, petty criminals, people fencing stolen goods and stolen jewelry. For months, he made small scores, tiny heists, nothing that would draw attention, but everything designed to build a reputation. He shared his money with other criminals, split profits, made it look good. He had to be useful. He had to be someone they wanted around. By early 1977, about 6 months in, Pistone finally made the connection that mattered. He met a mobster named Benjamin Lefty Guns Ruggiero. Lefty was in his 60s, an enforcer for the Bonanno family, a man who had committed murder for the mob. And somehow, against all odds, Lefty took a liking to Donnie Brasco. The friendship, the hook. This is where their operation changed everything. Lefty didn't just bring Donnie around, he became his mentor. He taught him the mob rules, how to act, how to talk, what you could do, and what would get you killed. He introduced Brasco to other members of the Bonanno family, higher-ranking guys, connected people. And Lefty did something dangerous. He started to genuinely care about Donnie. They spent years together, working jobs, selling stolen jewelry, running gambling operations, moving money. Lefty saw Donnie as his protege, his kid, his friend. By 1980, Pistone had been undercover for 4 years, longer than anyone planned. He was starting to get close to something bigger. The top levels of the Bonanno family were starting to trust him. A captain named Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano was preparing to do something historic. He was going to make Donnie Brasco a member of the family, a made man. To make someone a made man, there's an official ceremony, an oath, a ritual that goes back decades. To become a made man, Brasco would have to commit a murder. The FBI was running out of time.
The danger, the final push. By late 1980, the FBI realized something they hadn't expected. Pistone was becoming the criminal he was pretending to be. He'd been undercover so long that the line between who he really was and who he pretended to be was starting to blur. He was thinking like a mobster, acting like a mobster, living like a mobster. And the mob was getting ready to kill for him. When Sonny Black ordered Pistone to kill a man as his final test for becoming a made man, the FBI knew it couldn't last anymore. They couldn't let their agent actually murder someone. And more importantly, they couldn't let the mob figure out that Donnie Brasco was a federal agent. Because if they did, both Pistone and everyone who sponsored him would be marked for death. The end. July 26, 1981. FBI agents drove to Milwaukee first. They needed Pistone to testify against a crime boss there. They pulled him out of his undercover operation without warning. One day he was Donnie Brasco, the next day he was Joseph Pistone, federal agent. He said goodbye to Lefty and Sonny Black without knowing it was forever. Then the FBI did something that would change both men's lives forever. They went to Sonny Black's house and told him the truth. They showed him photographs, Pistone wearing his FBI badge,
Pistone with other federal agents, Pistone as Joseph Pistone, FBI special agent. Sonny Black didn't believe it at first. Then reality hit. Donnie Brasco, the guy he'd treated like a son, the guy he was about to make a member of the family, the guy he trusted completely, was a federal agent. The consequences: immediate and brutal. The mob's response was swift. The Bonanno family blamed Sonny Black and Lefty for letting an informant into their ranks. That was a death sentence in the Mafia. 2 days after the FBI revealed the truth, Sonny Black was shot and killed dead in New York. Lefty would have been killed too, except the FBI arrested him before the mob could get to him. He was prosecuted for his crimes with Donnie Brasco. But here's the thing about Lefty. Even after learning that Brasco was a federal agent, even after being arrested because of him, even after facing prison, Lefty still said it with sadness. I really loved that kid. The impact: over 200 indictments. The information Pistone gathered during those 6 years of undercover work was massive. He wasn't just a jewel thief working with low-level mobsters. He'd climbed all the way up. He knew the structure, he knew the players, he knew how the money moved. He knew about the Bonanno family operations in New York and Florida. He helped expose the mob's narcotics pipeline, pizzerias and other shops that were really drug distribution centers. The FBI used his testimony to prosecute mobsters all over the country. More than 200 Mafia members were indicted as a result of Operation Donnie Brasco. Over 100 were convicted. The operation was so successful that the FBI completely changed how it fought organized crime. Undercover operations became the primary weapon against the mob. Before Pistone, the FBI mostly relied on informants and surveillance. After Pistone, undercover agents became standard. The price: living in the shadows. The mob put a $500,000 open contract on Pistone's head. That was 1981. More than 40 years later, in 2021, Pistone said the contract was probably still open. He can't go by his real name, he can't live a normal life, he can't tell his neighbors who he is. He's relocated at least 5 or 6 times. He travels under an assumed name, he wears a disguise. His family has lived with this for over 4 decades. The FBI gave him $500 for his 6 years of undercover work. $500. No bonus, no special compensation, just the flat fee that was standard at the time. He did retire from the FBI eventually and became an author. He wrote a book called Donnie Brasco, My Undercover Life in the Mafia. It became a bestseller. They made it into a movie. But he still can't be public about who he really is. The twist. Here's what makes this story tragic. Lefty Ruggiero was arrested in 1981 because of Pistone's testimony. He went to prison for his crimes. And while he was in prison, something unexpected happened. Lefty became a different person. He wasn't the dangerous enforcer anymore. He was an older man, sick, weak. In 1992, after serving 11 years, he was released early due to illness. 2 years later, on November 24th, 1994, he died of testicular cancer. Lefty spent the last years of his life thinking about Donnie Brasco. According to reports, he never got over it. He never stopped thinking about his kid, the man he'd mentored, the man he'd taught, the man he thought he knew, had been betraying him the entire time. The legacy, the undercover revolution. When Joseph Pistone went undercover in 1976, it was revolutionary. Nobody had done a deep cover operation like this before. Nobody. And had stayed undercover that long. Nobody had gotten so close to the top of the mob. The FBI wasn't even sure it would work, but it did. And it proved something important. You could get inside the Mafia. You could learn their secrets. You could gather the evidence to take them down. It became the template for everything the FBI would do against organized crime over the next decade. When the FBI took down all the major mob bosses in the 1980s and 1990s, they were using techniques that Pistone pioneered: undercover operations, deep cover, living the life, building relationships. That all came from Joseph Pistone walking into a bar in Brooklyn in 1976, pretending to be a jewel thief.
The final truth. The most important thing about this story isn't the arrests or the convictions. It's what it shows about how dangerous loyalty can be. Lefty Ruggiero was loyal to the mob. He killed for them, he worked for them his entire life. But his real loyalty was to Donnie Brasco, to his kid, to his friend. And that loyalty destroyed him. It got him arrested, it got him imprisoned, it got him murdered by his own organization. All because he trusted the wrong person. The mob's biggest strength was supposed to be loyalty, the code, the bond between members. But Joseph Pistone showed that loyalty could be weaponized, that trust could be exploited, that sometimes the person you trust most is the person taking you down.
Number 6, August 24th, 1902, Palermo, Sicily. A boy was born who would become the most powerful mob boss in American history. His name was Carlo Gambino. And for decades, the FBI had no idea what he actually was. The disguise. An old man who looked harmless. Here's what people saw when they looked at Carlo Gambino. Small, thin, quiet, a prominent nose, a friendly face, the kind of man who looked like he ran a bakery, not an empire. He lived in a simple 2-story house on Long Island, not the mansion you'd expect from a major crime boss, just a regular suburban home with a low fence and marble statues on the front lawn. He didn't wear expensive suits, didn't show up at nightclubs, didn't caulk in the streets where cops could hear him. He was invisible. That was on purpose. While other mafia bosses wore their power like a neon sign, Gambino did the opposite. He made being dangerous look boring. And the FBI fell for it completely. The reality, he controlled everything. From 1957 to 1976, Carlo Gambino controlled more money, more people, and more territory than any single crime boss in America. One of 5 families ran New York's underworld. Gambino's family was not just one of them. It was the biggest. His fingers were in everything. Labor unions. He controlled the longshoremen on the New York docks. Any ship that came in, Gambino's people got paid. Any construction project in the city, Gambino's family had a piece. Gambling. He ran illegal card games across 3 states. Heroin smuggling. He had a pipeline from Sicily to New York that moved hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of drugs every year. JFK Airport. His crew ran rackets inside the airport. They stole cargo. They shook down workers. They controlled parts of New York's biggest transportation hub. All of this happened while the FBI watched. And they couldn't prove a thing. The problem? The FBI had no idea. In the late 1950s, the FBI's director, J. Edgar Hoover, had publicly denied that the Mafia even existed. Then, in November 1957, something changed everything. Police raided a house in Valachi, New York. It belonged to a low-level mobster named Joseph Barbara. Inside, they found 62 Mafia bosses from across the country at a secret meeting. The jig was up. The FBI could no longer claim organized crime wasn't real. The Bureau immediately started investigating the men at that meeting. Carlo Gambino was there. Now the FBI had to figure out who he actually was and what he actually did. They pulled together everything they had. And that's when they realized this old man from Brooklyn was running the entire city. The investigation. How they figured it out. The FBI put Gambino under constant surveillance starting in 1962. They followed him, they watched his house, they tracked his meetings. For 2 years straight, FBI agents sat outside his home observing everything he did. But Gambino barely talked to anyone. He had almost no phone calls. He didn't meet people in the streets where they could be seen. One agent noted that during 2 years of surveillance, the only words he overheard Gambino say to other mafia bosses were frog legs. Frog legs. That was it. A conversation about dinner. He knew the FBI was listening, so he said nothing. But absence of speech doesn't mean absence of power. The FBI started tracking his money instead. They discovered hidden interests in businesses all over New York. Restaurants, waste management companies, construction firms, garment factories. On the surface, these were legitimate businesses, but they were cover operations for moving money. They also found out that Gambino had connections to Meyer Lansky, the financial genius behind organized crime. The two men partnered together to control gambling interests in Cuba before the Communist Revolution. More importantly, the FBI realized Gambino had a seat on something called the Commission. The Commission was the board of directors of the entire American Mafia. There were 9 members. Gambino was one of them. And by the 1960s, he was the most important one. The turning point when they understood. The real breakthrough came when Joe Valachi testified to Congress. Remember from the last video? Valachi was the first mafia member to publicly break the code of silence and reveal how organized crime actually worked. In his testimony, Valachi described the entire structure, the families, the bosses, the rules, and he named Carlo Gambino as one of the most powerful men in the organization. Suddenly, everything the FBI had been gathering made sense. All those businesses, all that money, all those meetings with other mafia bosses. Gambino wasn't just a member of one family, he was the leader of the bosses. The FBI's own files called him Boss of the Bosses. He was the most powerful crime boss in America. But here's the problem the FBI faced. They still couldn't arrest him. In 1970, they arrested Gambino for arranging a major robbery. It was a solid case. Except one thing happened. All their witnesses disappeared or refused to testify. The charges were dropped. That same year, his nephew, Manny, was kidnapped and murdered by an Irish gang trying to extort ransom money, an insult no other crime boss would tolerate. Gambino ordered one of his younger associates to handle it, an up-and-comer named John Gotti. Gotti and his crew hunted down the men and killed them. It sent the message, you don't touch Gambino's family. Gambino stayed free. The FBI tried everything. They surveilled them, they tapped phones, they had informants everywhere. But Gambino simply didn't give them anything to work with. He barely spoke. He used cutouts for all his business. He buried his crimes in layers of legitimate operations. By the time the FBI understood who he really was, he was already too careful. The Godfather effect. Here's something interesting. The character of Don Vito Corleone in the movie The Godfather was partly inspired by Carlo Gambino. Vito is described as a quiet man, a man of principle, someone who handles his business without drawing attention. That's exactly who Gambino was in real life. An old man who went to church, who took care of his family, who was respected by his peers. Except his business was criminal enterprise on a massive scale. The legacy. An empire that lasted for decades. Most mafia bosses get caught or killed young. Not Gambino. He ran his organization for 19 years as the top boss. During that entire time, he spent a total of 22 months in prison. And that was for tax evasion before he took over the family. As a major crime boss, he never spent a single day in prison. He died of natural causes in 1976 at age 74, in his own house, surrounded by his family.
That makes him almost unique in mafia history. He lived longer, stayed more free, and accumulated more power than almost any crime boss before or after him. The empire he built lasted for decades after his death. Bosses came and went. The Gambino family remained. Today, more than 40 years after he died, the crime family still carries his name. Why he's forgotten? You probably know the names of other mob bosses. Al Capone, John Gotti. Tony Soprano is a fictional character based on real stories. But Carlo Gambino? Most people have never heard of him. That's because Gambino succeeded by being forgotten. He didn't seek publicity. He didn't get into dramatic shootouts. He didn't make enemies with reporters. He just quietly controlled everything. While flashy bosses got arrested or killed, Gambino was at home playing cards with his family. The lesson: quiet power is most dangerous. The FBI made a mistake with Carlo Gambino. They were looking for loud, obvious crime bosses, people making big moves, people you could see. What they missed was the most dangerous kind of power, the kind that doesn't announce itself. Gambino proves something that still matters today. You don't have to be visible to be powerful. You don't have to be loud to be in control. Sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are the ones who look the most harmless.